Wow, that's really good.
Nipponzan Buddha.
Okay.
Tom Buddha. I put in Tom
Yeah.
Buddhas.
That'll be part of the.
So, are you going to ask me questions or?
Yeah. So Jun-san will be interviewing,
Jun-san's going to interview.
but most of it really is going to come from you, from your.
Yeah, go ahead,
history.
interview from you. Because I always asking same thing.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So.
You know my
we're
idea,
starting?
my pattern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you okay?
Yes.
Ready?
Yeah,
All right.
I guess so.
Well, if you can give us your name, full name first, and then we can ask other questions.
Myoho Renge Kyo. Myoho Renge Kyo.
トムさん、お茶が欲しいですか？
いただきます。
はい。
My name is Tom Matsuda.
And so, Tom, tell us a little bit about your connection with this land, and maybe going back in history, and your recollection with Hank Hazelton, Albany Free School, and Grafton Peace Pagoda.
Okay. So I don't know exactly when to start. I was living in New York City
How old?
in the 80s. Let's see. Was it yes, it was in the 80s, early 80s. And I had met the Buddhist monks. I had walked across the country on the World Peace March. Actually, no, it was before that. I had met Sauda Shonin in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado in 70, around 78, 76 or 78. And that was a big influence to me. I met another Japanese person, Kawamoto, and he introduced me to Native American people. And so that was a great influence. Came back to New York City and started working for supporting Native people. There was a group in New York that was supporting the occupation of the Mohawks, and so I was working with that group. And that group, that support group, was affiliated with Hank Hazelton up here in Grafton. And we, on quite a few occasions, we came up here as kind of a retreat to get away from the city, to have some meetings, and Hank was gracious to let us stay at his place. He had a teepee right outside his house. I remember staying there and gathering around the fire there. So we learned about Hank, and I got to know Hank. He was so involved with the Native people here, and I believe he started the group called RAIN, Rights for American Indians Now. And Hank was so passionate. I remember going into his house, and on the second floor of his house was just plastered with posters. It was like wall-to-wall posters on the ceiling, and they were all from Akwesasne, and all Native posters. He had boxes and boxes and boxes of literature, and he would go to all the powwows in the area, and he would put out a table with leaflets and pamphlets and petitions, all supporting Native people. He was very respected. I learned afterwards he was very respected by the Six Nations. I think it was mainly the Six Nations. I'm not sure who all he worked with, but at that time there was a very famous publication called Akwesasne Notes, and it was known nationwide, worldwide as kind of the news outlet for Native issues. And there was an article in there, almost like a full-page article about Hank Hazelton, I remember, many years ago, where they were recognizing Hank's support. Pretty unusual for a non-native person to be featured in this pretty radical native newspaper.
Do you remember the article name or the newspaper?
I do not. I tried to find it, but I can't. I wasn't able to find it. That's just in my recollection. So we would come up here and have these very peaceful gatherings, sit around the fire at night, and Hank would take us for a walk around his land here. And he had over 200 acres, and he was caretaking this land here. He wanted to keep it as natural as possible. He didn't allow animals on his land, or dogs, because they would scare away the natural animals here. These are just some anecdotes I remember. I remember on the other side of the road here, he took us into the woods there and walked around, and he said, this is going to be a center in the future. And he had this name for this place, and I forget the name. I think it was, yes.
Greg, you remember?
Turnanog.
Okay. Celtic name?
Yes. And I think it translates to something like, what's the translation? It would be like there's a, that escapes me. Turnanog.
Yes.
Do you remember, Jun-san, the translation? Turnanog is like a living, it's like eternity, or it's a place where people never die or disappear. It was.
That's mean.
Yeah, it would be easy to find.
Yeah, that
Like,
would be
by
interesting too.
looking it up. It's
How do you spell it?
TIR. N
O-G.
A-G.
O-A-G. Okay.
Something
Yeah,
along
something
that
like
line.
that. Yeah.
It's like a paradise.
So this was the name of his dream of a center on this land, and he took us around, and this is going to be where the community center is, and where everyone would eat together, and then this would be where the people would build their cabins, and that stuck with me. His vision for this land. then at Salvador Soin's invitation, I joined the World Peace March, walked across the country in '82, and we stopped at many native reservations on the way. Had native people walking with us. And then, so I had quit my job in New York City, gave all my possessions away, and joined this peace march. And then after the walk, I went back across the country, stopping at all native reservations, going up to the Six Nations, and then up to South Dakota, then up to Canada, and then out to the West Coast, and then down to a big mountain, and quite a journey. It was on the World Peace March I met Jun-san, and it was there were all these different legs of this walk that ended up in New York City.
That's 1982.
For the special session on disarmament at the United Nations, and Guruji initiated this walk, and the final was in America, and there were like 6 routes that ended up in New York City. I was on the Los Angeles route, Jun-san was on the San Francisco route, and there was one down from Montreal. There was one up from New Orleans. There was one from, I think, Seattle that went up, and I think that joined the Montreal War. I remember meeting Jun-san in a gathering in New York City, in some hall in New York, maybe NYU or somewhere. And it was a Native American. You know, there were all these events when we got to New York City, and there was 1 million people that gathered for that special session on disarmament. It was wall-to-wall people. You'd walk down any avenue, and all the side streets, it would be wall-to-wall people. It was amazing. And then, so there was this, one gathering of Native issues, and I'm pretty sure that's when I first actually met Jun-san, and something clicked. Like I felt like I had known her for. It was, when you meet someone and it feels like it's not the first time, or you're not shy or bashful because it feels like you know the person.
Really?
Did you feel that way, Jun-san, when you first met Thomas-san?
I don't think she remembers. She was so involved with the Native people, and So after that, there were many occasions that I got to spend time with Jun-san, and one was at DQ University, where she was living with Dennis Banks, or supporting Dennis Banks. She had a small temple on the DQ University.
California.
Yes, in California.
Oh, that's in California.
So I'm. This is kind of long, so you can edit it.
Yeah, will do.
So in California, I met this woman that introduced me to a filmmaker that was coming over from Japan and needed someone to be like a tour guide on the out on the Navajo Hopi reservation. I said, "Oh, this sounds interesting."
Yeah, that's Hopi property.
So, oh, this is interesting. So so I met the filmmaker, and we went out to
Cheers.
out to the Hopi land, and he was making this movie, Hopi Prophecy, and we interviewed many of the elders and about the prophecy, and then we went around to a lot of uranium sites and met survivors of the working in the mines, and that were many grandmothers that their husbands had died from cancer, and we saw many of the sites there, and okay, I have to digress now. I remembered. When I was in working with this group in New York City, there was this guy, Robin Norris, that had lived with this family out on this Indian reservation in the Southwest. And he says, so I met him in New York City. That was actually at the Museum of Natural History. There was a documentary about the Navajo and Dene, and he got up afterwards and talked about the issues out there. And then I went up and met him, and then we got to know each other. And he says, "Oh, Tom, you would really enjoy going out to this family out in the Southwest, you know, family that I had stayed with." And I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." And so when I went out to join the World Peace March, my other kind of mission was to go live with this family out in the Southwest. And so I joined the Peace March for a couple weeks, and then I said I was going out to this reservation. So, you know, I'm go out to, and there's nowhere, it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no road signs, nothing out there, and just dirt roads. And, you know, I had to, I got lost, and this grandmother, I pull up to this grandmother, happened to be Catherine Smith, which is one of the big resistors there. And she said, "Oh, I can't tell you how to get there. I'll take you there." So she drove, and we went to this. It was like 5 miles away. Each house is like 5 miles away,
Wow.
or at least a mile away almost.
Wow.
And so I you know, "Hi, I'm Tom," you know, and they look at me, "Who's this guy?" and you know, the grandmother doesn't speak any English, and gosh, it was like another planet, or another country. There was the elders above maybe 50 did not speak English. There was no running water, no electricity. Everyone knew each other, you know, everyone was related. And I ended up staying for a couple months, or a month maybe, herding sheep and chopping wood. And it changed, another life-changing experience. And then I left and went to join the Peace March, and then ended up in New York City, met Junsun, and then came back across the country, and spent went back to the Big Mountain many times. And you know, they were in the middle of a big, that's still going on after all these years, of this resistance of being relocated from their land. You know, there was the Hopi and Navajo had always lived with each other in proximity of each other, and the Hopis lived on mesas, and the Navajo or Dene were kind of migrated around, and so the U.S. government said we have to make boundaries and reservations, and artificially split the land, and this is Hopi and this is Navajo, and then so these Navajo families at Big Mountain, they were supposed to be relocated, and they said, no, we're not leaving our traditional land, and they're still resisting today. And the Hopis live on the mesas, so if you move the Navajo off the land, the Hopi aren't going to go live there, and lo and behold, there's all these natural resources under the land there. So that's the kind of feels like that's the underlying issue of their resistance. So back to my story about working on the Hopi prophecy. So I'm going out with these filmmakers, and we go out to Hopi, and we get out there, and we're going out to visit this guy Larry Anderson, who's one of the big AIM leaders on the Dene land, and so it's in the middle of nowhere too, and so I knew a family out there, and so we ended up staying in their garage, and then I take them out to Big Mountain, and so he films and does some interviews with some of the people out there, and their connection with the Hopi people, and their in this issue they're dealing with, and how the Hopi come out to support them. They support the Hopi because they're saying the traditional people do not want this land dispute.
That time you came to Dennis Banks interview.
Yes, come in.
That way connected.
Yes.
So can you explain?
Yeah, come soon.
Yeah,
So this is just a little anecdotes on the way, but so we end up this filmmaker didn't know anything about Big Mountain, but then we ended up like thinking the film was ended, but then he said, we're in a coffee shop in Flagstaff, and he said, we got to go back to Big Mountain. And so we go back there, and we spent the whole day with a family there, just filming their daily life there, and that becomes another big element in the movie. Well, so after we finished filming in the Southwest, he says, I'm going to interview Dennis Banks, and Dennis Banks was convicted of trafficking explosives or something, and he had run away from that charge, and he was in California, and that's why he was at DQ University, because the governor at that time, Jerry Brown, gave him asylum in California. But he couldn't leave the state of California. Then the governor, his term ended, and Dennis Banks ended up sneaking across the country to Onondaga. And Onondaga was a very special place, seat of the Six Nations, and the central fire of the Six Nations, and they were very low key. And I think that's how this is my take, and that's how they survived their traditions and their religion, their language, everything survived with them. And they were known for their diplomacy. So they had an agreement with the New York State that no police would come onto their reservation. And so Dennis could stay on the reservation. He couldn't leave the reservation, but the police wouldn't come and arrest him, which was pretty, I think, very unusual.
So that was his asylum.
Yeah,
that he found. It's great.
And so that's where we went to visit Dennis to interview him. And Jun-san was living with Dennis in Onondaga. and she had came with him and supported his efforts. And Dennis was, I think he was, wherever he went, he organized. And so he when he was in Onondaga, he organized this canoe race and, was always working with the community there, wherever he went. So while I'm at staying with Dennis in Onondaga, Jun-san says, every month I go to the Capitol in Albany to pray for the governor to give Dennis asylum in New York State. I think that was the reason.
Yeah.
And so she.
Yeah. Governor's New York governor
Mhm.
to Dennis asked sanctuary
Mhm.
to travel in New York State.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that Dennis asked him.
And Jun-san would go once a month to the Capitol and fast for 3 days in front of the Capitol. And so I, when the filmmakers went back to Japan, I stayed with Jun-san and fasted with her. And then, and then I remembered, well, not so far from here, there's this land and this guy, Hank Hazelton, and his dream is to build a center on this land. And gee, wouldn't a Peace Pagoda be nice? Seems like the perfect spot. So I told Jun-san about Hank and this land, and she said, "Oh, tell him to come meet me," And I left and went to Japan, and but I called up Hank and told him about Jun-san, and he didn't come visit her when I was there, but he came at another time and met Jun-san. And
Yeah, he showed up when I was fasting.
when you were fasting, yeah. And
That's 1 week's fasting every month.
1 week. And Jun-san would Jun-san can tell the story, but this is just what I heard. That she kind of brushed him off and said, he came and said, "What's a Peace Pagoda?" And Jun-san said, "Well, there's this opening in Peace Pagoda in Vienna,
Vienna, Austria.
and if you want to learn about Peace Pagoda, you have to go to Vienna for this opening." And that was it. But then what the story that I heard was Native people got word of this, and since they respected Hank so much, they actually bought him a plane ticket to go to Vienna.
Sitting behind.
Hmm?
Person, you sitting there, you see
Sit over there.
Thomas-san's face.
I know what he looks like.
And then so Hank ended up going to Vienna, and he got so inspired by this idea of the Peace Pagoda that he asked Guruji for a Peace Pagoda on his land, and Guruji looks over to Jun-san and says, "Okay, you have to build a Peace Pagoda here," and that's how she got roped into the Peace Pagoda here.
Is that in 1970? What year was that?
I'm not sure. That
Do you
the
remember
Vienna
what year was
opening.
that? When was it? What year?
1985 area is what
Yeah.
is going on.
Yeah, somewhere.
Because 1982 World Peace March,
Yeah.
and after come back to California,
Mhm.
Dennis have to escape
Yeah.
from 1983 or 1984 area.
Mhm.
He have to move from California, and somehow I have to move with Dennis to ending Onondaga Nation.
Mhm.
So that is 90. 84 area or something. So those area lots of going on.
I'm not sure where to go from there.
So my question is because without Thompson's introduce our Nipponzan Myohoji about Peace Pagoda, I never hear. I never moved to this land. And this is not my idea or anything. So people keep asking, why you selecting this place, Peace Pagoda? So I have long story have to explain.
Jun-san, when the story I heard is when she was in Japan, she didn't want to come to America. She kind of hated America. She loved India. She wanted to go and practice in India. But then Guruji sent Jun-san and a bunch of other monks over for the longest walk and to support the native people. And then I think she became very connected with native people and Dennis, and she wanted to practice on the West Coast supporting native people. But then this happened here.
Everything opposite.
So I feel like I have to support Jun-san.
I have to more, talk to Hank before she got stroke. But I met Hank-san after giving land to us to start making Peace Pagoda. Maybe 1 year or 2 years, Hank-san was very, very, no stroke time. But I not speak very well English. Also lots of going on construction. So I miss it all, important thing to conversation with Hank-san. Hank-san always generosity because Hank-san, when we moved to this place, he said, "You welcome to my house to your temple." He opened his house to welcoming using for temple. I feel we are wake up too crazy early, and I like to good friend of Hank-san. I don't want destroy Hank-san's life because every day walk too early and too many people move around. It's a kind of destroy Hank-san's life way. So I said, how about we are living the cow barn? He said, this is not living space. But he said, you welcome using if you can use. So somehow we start living over there. But he always worry about, because in winter time they have no insulation.
It was so cold in the winter, and you could see between the boards. You could see light coming through.
And snow come from prayer time. Snow come from the
so
top.
Cold.
So Hank said, if too very cold, you welcome anybody escape to my house. That time Hank-san still sharp. I remember this kind of conversation. One time I somehow walk into the Hank-san's house to some reason, and I hear the Fuji Guruji's voice. I said, wow, why Fuji Guruji's voice is Hank-san's house? He recording Fuji Guruji's speech in the longest walk. So I recognize Hank-san already very, very strong connection to my teacher, Fuji Guruji. But he not recognize either, But I more recognize how somehow mysterious world. In 1978, longest walk. Wow, Hank was longest walk, ending time. And he was recording Fuji Guruji's speech. So he listening Fuji Guruji's speech in that day.
Hmm.
He never showed us,
Hmm.
but I heard Fuji Guruji's voice
Mm.
in Hank San's house.
Hmm.
So those areas still Hank San's very clear, no stroke time.
Mhm.
So I remember the Thanksgiving time, he invited everybody to go to Hank San's house to the traditional Hank's, Thanksgiving dinner. And turkeys and
Mhm.
blueberry, how to say,
Mhm. Mhm.
all Hank cooking to us. So after that starts stroke happen.
Oh.
So it's very bad to the,
Mhm.
if you are more connected to Hank San.
Mhm.
That I thought Hank was very good. He was chopping wood.
Yeah.
It's very strong way.
Mm.
He was always no t-shirt,
Mm.
always no clothes up there, and chopping wood, very strong way. So
He would hug you and lift you off the ground. He was.
He was a
always had-
bear.
yeah, he always had a strong.
but he was so, worried about our lifestyle is so crazy.
And I remember a lot of Native people would drop by Hank's place, and these Six Nations leaders like Tom, what was his name? Tom Porter. Yeah,
James one.
yeah. They would come and drop by Hank's place. I was really surprised. And they had a long journey down from the north down, like when they were going down to New York City, and so they would stop and sometimes stay with Hank.
Hank was open sweat ceremony for invite many native friends. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before we are,
Mm-hmm.
can you explain?
Yeah, I don't recall. That's all I remember is there were many Native people that came through to Hank's place.
But you didn't participate in any sweat ceremonies there.
I don't remember.
No, he invite different leader. To
Yeah.
Provide different
Yes,
leaders.
yes. Hank would never lead a sweat lodge.
Oh, yeah.
If other Native people were here, he would.
He would participate
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember going to a sweat lodge here at Hank's place at that time.
So yourself, you so surprised Hank so quick decision to make Peace Pagoda.
Yes. Yeah.
You are responsible.
I didn't know. It was all kind of wouldn't it be great to have peace pagodas all over the country and all over the world at that time, and so it was just almost an afterthought. Oh, Hank has this land and has this great idea, so yeah, I was very surprised too.
So Pat San is here. Pat San is, remember, end of the stroke time, huh?
A little bit, yes.
You want to come up to the table, Pat?
I can.
Yeah, please join us.
I have a story about
Yeah,
Tom
sit
too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember or not, but
Uh-oh.
right here,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a good story,
Okay.
which impressed me tremendously, and maybe you remember or not, I don't know.
So, Pat, can you tell us your full name, please?
Patricia Carley.
Okay.
You met Pat San, right?
I think so.
Hank was passed away time.
Yeah, I didn't visit Grafton too much. I came and visited Hank several times when he was under Caroline's care. So I think we've met.
I'm sure everybody's met at some point. You know, we just sort of swirl around each other,
Okay.
which is wonderful.
So tell us about your recollection of Hank.
All right. Well, I can start with how I found this place. It's always a good place to start.
Yeah.
I always love to know how people find their way here, right in the middle of the woods. I just thought of that on the way out in the car. You can't see the pagoda from anywhere except the air, and everybody finds their way. So this is 1992, that's spring. And I read an article in the newspaper by Paul Grandel in the Times-Union, and he was writing about a Japanese woman who was at the side of the road on Route 2 picking up old rusty nails and hammering them straight. And he stopped to ask her what she was doing. I'm building a peace pagoda. Wow. So I call up a friend of mine. I don't even know what a peace pagoda is. I said, there's some lady on the side of the road straightening out nails to build a shrine. And I've got new nails, you know, and my friend's like, I've got new nails in the basement. This is way before we knew about Junsan, of course. So we came out and we took a little road trip to come out here and did find the place. Took us a while. We had to stop at Town Hall in Grafton. And of course they knew Junsan because she'd gotten permits or whatever. So they directed us out here. And it was still being built. It was all the birchwood scaffolding was still up. They hadn't finished hadn't enclosed the dome. And they had to climb up a ladder to get to the first level. So we went right to, as it turned out, Hank's house. But I didn't know them at all, but we went in and that's where I met Hank and Caroline. And I thought for a very long time that they were the Peace Pagoda. I had no idea that Junsan wasn't here, so she must have been on a walk or something. You weren't here at that time, it was the spring of 92. And then my friend and I realized that Caroline was feeding all the workers, all you gentlemen, and I'm sure some women that were here. So we started bringing food out every week to help supplement, because we saw that she was cooking like all day for all these people. So we started bringing out food. And I had a son with a disability, and he was probably about 11 years old at the time. And I would bring him with me, and then I had my son Danny, who was a baby. So we came out, and Hank was already in the hospital bed in the living room of their house with all these tubes and wires, you know, catheter or whatever he had going on him, all kinds of stuff. And my son John, who was very notorious for pulling on things and ripping things, he and Hank, he'd sit on the floor by Hank's bed and hold his hand. And Hank was like babbling at that time. Remember, he would just blah, 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 blah. And that's the way my son talked. So they would just sit there and babble to each other and holding hands. And my son would get all twined up in the catheter stuff, and he never pulled anything out. And it was just magical. It was so magical. They bonded in whatever way they were bonding. It was just beautiful to see. And so then, this is my part about Tom here. So my son was doing artwork in his class at school, and it looked like Japanese characters to me. So I brought it out here. So, well, maybe one of these guys ought to know what it says. So I brought it out here, and I just showed you all having lunch out there by the barn or wherever. And I held it up, and you immediately said, that's the character for In the Dreamtime. And I was like, oh my gosh, because that's where I always thought my son lived. It was in the Dreamtime because he didn't talk. He communicated in other ways. And I always felt that he was like kind of in that in-between place between life and our life and spirit life. So that's how we met. You probably don't remember that at all. And you so impacted my life in that moment.
What
And I
did you said? What kind of character? What character you wrote? John wrote.
The calligraphy.
Yeah, calligraphy.
In the Dreamtime.
It was just, he just did it freehand, took orange paint and whatever he did.
What Tom said.
In the Dreamtime.
In the Dreamtime?
Yeah.
And what is that in Japanese? Do you recall?
If I knew it was coming today, I would have brought the
Oh,
picture. I mean,
oh.
you were going to be here. I have the picture framed
Okay.
that he did,
Wow.
and had that written on the back in the Dreamtime. Yeah.
Mm.
So it was so.
Mm.
What a connection! What a connection! I just.
Mm.
So everything here was magical. Everything that happened here from then on was just magical for me. Really. And at that time, his occupational therapist was Nora Neal.
Oh,
You grew up with her husband?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, across the street.
Yes, and we figured all that out.
Yeah.
We were very
Yeah.
connected.
You grew up with her husband, huh?
Yeah.
What's
yeah.
his name?
Jeff.
Jeff
Jeff
Neal.
Neal. Yeah.
And I don't know how they ended up here, but she was my son's occupational therapist, was Jeff's wife. And I was telling her the story. Oh, no, I was just telling her the story. Oh, there's this guy out there at the Peace Pagoda. Well, yeah, my husband grew up with him. Oh, my goodness, we're so connected. I just love that. The connections are wonderful. Wonderful.
So, can you end in the story of Hank-san's passed away time? You was here.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't involved with when he passed away.
Dolores.
I really don't remember. I know afterwards I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't part of any of that. No. But I just went to visit him all the time, while he was at the house.
Can you share more story of even he cannot speak? More memory of Hank.
Well, what I had said about him just, making those babbling sounds was all I really remember with him, and being, sitting with my son. And I know he probably was trying to talk, is what I'm guessing, but no words were coming out at that time from him. He really, so that was like 92, 93-ish that I knew him probably, and there was no conversation like we're having. No, he wasn't able to do that. So that's my story for that part. I've got a lot of other stories, but that's my story for that. And with Tom, bless you. Thank you I'm so happy you're here today.
Thank you for
So
sharing.
somebody has a question more to Tom-san,
Well,
Greg-san.
I remember visiting Hank in his condition after did he have 2 strokes? After his stroke when he was in the hospital bed, but I think his intentions and his voice that we heard was not necessarily what Hank was saying. I think Hank's, in his mind, he was talking to you, but mechanically, he was unable to verbalize it mechanically. So you always had to look him in the eye, and you knew his intent was real, that he was there. That there was his being and his spirit was not shaken. I don't think. I think he still had a will to be involved. He was telling us his thoughts, but we just had to sort of interpret it in the best way we could. It was a difficult time. I think you could sense the frustration in his eyes, that he kind of understood that we were having a hardship understanding him.
I remember it seemed like he was very passionate. He would hold your hand very strongly and trying to communicate with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you,
I
Thomas-san.
like everybody invite September 5